Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
All right, welcome back to Battles of the American Civil War. Behind the Battles, fresh off of Ulysses S. Grant and his escapades for literally 4 hours long. Those two episodes took, and we're on to his counterpart of the war.
Yeah, that guy had no clue what the hell he was doing.
His friend slash, well, yeah, in his presidency, it was just turmoil and scandals and just ignorance. Yeah, we moved to the other side of the aisle with his friend slash, what's the word I'm looking for? What do they call the adversary, right?
Yeah.
Were they adversaries, though? I mean, they didn't hate each other. Friend slash competitor. I don't know. Let me know in the comments, chat. Robert Edward Lee, of course, we're talking about.
Bobby Lee.
Who literally was a career military guy, having spent up until the Civil War started. The dude had been in the military for literally 28 years or some shit like that, and still decides to turn his back on the United States, all for his lovely Virginia. Actually, we're going to take a look at some of his views on slavery that I guarantee a lot of people don't even know, or never even heard his views on slavery before. So that should be interesting. And then we'll take obviously a look at his army career up until leading the South for the Civil War. Obviously, we're going to get into some Civil War battles. Not as many in this as we have previously episodes, but and then we'll take a look at his later life, which he lives a pretty normal life afterwards.
Only for a couple more years.
He was born Stratford Hall Plantation in Westmoreland County, Virginia, to Henry Lee III and Anne Hill Carter Lee on January 19th, 1807. His ancestor, Richard Lee I, he immigrated from Shropshire, England, to Virginia in 1639.
Makes sense.
His father suffered from severe financial reverses from failed investments, and he was put in debtor's prison. Soon after his release the following year, the family moved to the city of Alexandria, which at the time was still part of the District of Columbia.
I'm guessing it was a work prison, right?
Debtor's prison. I'm sure, yeah, you got to pay off your debt before you leave, right? Nobody paid debt. You go there and you pay off your debt by working in these prisons, so they had to work off their debt via labor or secured outside funds to pay the balance.
Nice. So either way.
Well, it's kind of shitty, I guess. Well, now they'll just toss you in prison for 20 years and be like, whatever, you don't have a chance to work it off.
Right.
Alexandria they moved to, which at the time was part of D.C., then retroceded back to Virginia in 1847. Both because there were then high-quality local schools there and because several members of Anne's extended family lived nearby. That's probably the main reason.
Right.
They didn't give a shit about the schools.
1811, 4-year-old Robert E. Lee and the family, including the newly born sixth child, Mildred, they moved to a house on Ornico Street. 1812, Lee's father moved permanently to the West Indies. Whoa. Lee attended Eastern View, a school for young gentlemen.
The hell did he go to West Indies for?
Right. He attended this school in Fauquier County, New Virginia. And then at the Alexandria Academy, free for local boys, where he showed an aptitude for mathematics.
Oh, the old tactician he is.
Although brought up to be a practicing Christian, he was not confirmed in the Episcopal Church until the age of 46, almost at his death.
Well, considering he was born in 07 and lived until 70-something, I don't think so.
A couple more years.
Yep. Anne Lee's family was often supported by a relative who was named William Henry Fitzhugh. You'll hear that name a couple times. Who owned, the Fitzhugh name, who owned the Ornico Street house and allowed the Lees to stay at his country home, Ravensworth.
Right.
Fitzhugh wrote to the United States Secretary of War, John Calhoun, urging that Robert be given an appointment to the United States Military Academy. What is up with these guys getting recommendations and getting shoo-ins to the damn West Point? Ulysses S. Grant was the same thing.
Shouldn't fuck.
It was. Fitzhugh had young Robert delivered the letter himself.
Oh.
Lee, he entered the West Point in summer of 1825, and at the time, the focus of the curriculum was engineering.
Okay.
The head of the United States Army Corps of Engineers supervised the school, and the superintendent was an engineering officer as well.
The cadets, they were not permitted to leave until they finished 2 years of study, and they were rarely allowed off the academy grounds. Lee, he graduated second in his class behind Charles Mason, who resigned from the Army a year after graduation.
He fuck does.
Lee did not incur any demerits during his 4-year course of study, a distinction shared by only 5 of his 45 classmates. In June 1829, he was commissioned a brevet second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. After that day of graduation, while awaiting assignment, he returned to Virginia, his lovely, lovely land of Virginia, to find his mommy on her deathbed. She died at Ravensworth on the 26th of July in 1829.
Damn.
1 month later.
August 11th, 1829, Brigadier General Charles Gratiot, he ordered Lee to Cockspur Island, Georgia. The plan was to build a fort on the marshy island, which would command the outlet of the Savannah River.
Fantastic.
Lee, he was involved in the early stages of construction as the island was being drained and built up. 1831, it became apparent that the existing plan to build what became known as Fort Pulaski would have to be revamped, and Lee was transferred to Fort Monroe at the tip of the Virginia Peninsula, which is today Hampton, Virginia.
There you go, Hamptoners.
While home in the summer of 1829, Lee had apparently courted Mary Custis, whom he had known since a child.
Aw, his little sweet. I always had a crush on you. Mary was the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington by her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis, and step-great-granddaughter of George Washington, the first president of the United States of America. Mary was the only surviving child of George Washington Parke Custis, George Washington's step-grandson, and Mary Lee Fitzhugh Custis, daughter of William Fitzhugh and Anne Bowling Randolph.
Lee, he obtained permission to write to her before leaving for Georgia, though Mary Custis warned Lee to be discreet in his writings as her mother read her letters, especially from men. Damn, how many little men did she get letters from? Custis refused Lee the first time he asked to marry her, as her father did not believe the son of a disgraced light horse Harry Lee, the old debtor prisoner himself, didn't believe he was a suitable man for his daughter.
Nope.
She finally accepted him with her father's consent in September of 1830 while he was on summer leave. Robert and Mary, they married June 30th, 1831 at Arlington House, which was her parents' house just across the Potomac from Washington. The 3rd U.S. Artillery served as honor guard at the marriage.
Lee's duties at Fort Monroe were varied, typical for a junior officer, and they ranged from budgeting to designing buildings. Although Mary Lee accompanied her husband to Hampton Roads, she spent about a third of her time at Arlington, though the couple's first son, George Washington Custis Lee, was born at Fort Monroe on the 16th of September, 1832. Custis Lee would go on to become a major general in the Civil War and an aide-de-camp to President Davis as well.
Sure did.
Although Robert and Mary were by all accounts devoted to each other, they were different in character. Bobby, he was tidy and punctual, qualities his wife lacked.
Well, she's a daughter of a famous family that had a bunch of slaves. So.
Right. Mary Lee also had trouble switching from being a rich man's daughter to having to manage a household with only 1 or 2 enslaved people. Beginning in 1832, Robert E. Lee had a close but platonic relationship with Harriet Talcott, wife of his fellow officer Andrew Talcott.
What's going on there? Well, life at Fort Monroe was marked by conflicts between artillery and engineering officers. Eventually, the War Department transferred all engineering officers away from Fort Monroe, except for Lee, who was ordered to take up residence on the artificial island of Rip Raps. Across the river from Fort Monroe, where Fort Wool would eventually rise and continue his work to improve the island. Lee, he duly moved there, then discharged all workers and informed the War Department he couldn't maintain laborers without the facilities of the fort. Makes sense, right?
Yeah. 1834, Lee was transferred to Washington as General Gratiot's assistant. Lee had hoped to rent a house in Washington for his family, but he was unable to find one.
That's weird.
Family stayed in Arlington, though Lieutenant Lee rented a room at a Washington boarding house for when the roads were impassable.
Probably quite frequently.
Yep, even when it was nice and sunny.
Right.
July 12th, 1835, Lee's daughter and second child, Mary Custis Lee, was born.
Hey, guys, how about being original, huh?
Right. Around that very same time, Lee was assigned to assist Andrew Talcott in surveying the southern border of Michigan. While on that expedition, he responded to a letter from an ill Mary Lee, which had requested he come back to Arlington. But why do you urge my immediate return and tempt one in the strongest manner? I rather require to be strengthened and encouraged to the full performance of what I am called on to execute.
He's like, why are you bothering me, woman? I'm trying to do my job.
Right. By the time I get there, you probably be good again.
Or dead.
Right. So kind of a waste of time either way.
Can I just survey some land? Lee, he completed the assignment and returned to his post in Washington, finding his wife ill at Ravensworth. Mary Lee, who had recently given birth, obviously, remained bedridden for several months. October of 1836, he was promoted to first lieutenant. He then served as an assistant in the chief engineer's office in Washington from 1834 to 37, but spent the summer of 1835 helping to lay out the state line between Ohio and Michigan.
Fantastic.
In the company of Lieutenant Washington Hood.
Look at this guy.
May 31st, 1837, Lee and his wife welcomed their third child, old William Henry Fitzhugh Lee, also known by Rooney Lee. Old Rooney Lee, huh?
He was also in
He
the
would
Civil
later
War.
become a cavalry major general in the Civil War.
He was a pretty damn good one, too.
He was all right.
As first lieutenant of engineers in 1837, Lee supervised engineering work for St. Louis Harbor and for the upper Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Among his projects was the mapping of the Des Moines Rapids on the Mississippi above Keokuk, Iowa, where the Mississippi's mean depth of 2.4 feet was the upper limit of steamboat traffic on the river.
2.4 feet?
Damn. A steamboat can go that shallow.
You can go there, right?
Nice. His work there earned him a promotion to captain.
All right, look at Captain Lee.
Captain Lee. All right.
All right.
Around 1842, Captain Robert E. Lee arrived at Fort Hamilton's post engineer. Robert, Mary, they would go on to have 4 more children before he set off to the Mexican-American War in 1846. Ann Carter Lee, born June 18, 1839. Eleanor Agnes Lee, born February 27, 1841. Robert Edward Lee, Jr., born October 27, 1843. It's all 2 years apart. Who Robert Edward would serve as a captain in the Civil War on the staff of his brother Rooney. Mildred Child Lee, born February 10th, 1846. All the children survived him except for Annie, who died in 1862.
She did. She had typhoid.
And they are all buried with their parents in the crypt of the University Chapel at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Lee, he distinguished himself in the Mexican-American War, which lasted from 46 to 48.
That was a bloody war, too, man.
Yeah. Well, he was one of Winfield Scott's chief aides in the march from Veracruz to Mexico City. See, I told you, man, we should have just kept Mexico City. Avoided what we're going through right now.
Right.
At least way down there.
Yes.
He was instrumental in several American victories through his personal reconnaissance as a staff officer. He found routes of attack that the Mexicans had not defended because they thought the terrain was impassable. Okay. He was promoted to brevet major after the Battle of Cerro Gordo on April 18th, 1847. He also fought at Contreras, Churubusco, and Chapultepec and was wounded at the last one.
First and last time he was probably wounded in battle, huh?
Yeah, I don't think he got wounded in Civil War. He got probably had dysentery a few times and shit himself a lot. But
Yeah, that happened a lot. By the end of the war, he had received additional brevet promotions to lieutenant colonel and colonel, but his permanent rank was still captain of engineers.
he's still getting paid like a colonel, though.
Right. He would remain a captain until his transfer to the cavalry in 1855. For the very first time, Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant met, and they worked with each other during the Mexican-American War. Close observations of the commanders constituted a learning process for both Lee and Grant. The Mexican-American War concluded the 2nd of February on Groundhog's Day, 1848. The fucking groundhog did not see a shadow, baby.
For the Mexicans, anyways.
Right.
After that war, Lee spent 3 years at Fort Carroll in Baltimore Harbor. During this time, his service was interrupted by other duties, among them surveying and updating maps in Florida. Cuban revolutionary Narciso Lopez, he intended to forcibly liberate Cuba from Spanish rule.
But he did.
Late 1849, searching for a leader for his filibuster expedition, he approached Jefferson Davis, then a United States senator. Davis, he declined and said, my duties are to be a senator, not a conqueror or whatever he said.
Right.
Davis, in turn, suggested Lee, who also declined. Both decided it was inconsistent with their duties.
Yeah. They didn't like it.
Right. Like, I'm here to survey landmarks, not...
Right.
Like, I'll survey your landmarks after you take over the country, but, you know.
Well, the decade of the 1850s were a very difficult time for Robert E. Lee. With his long absences from home, the increasing disability of his wife, troubles in taking over the management of a large slave plantation, and his often morbid concern with his personal failures. 1852, Lee was appointed superintendent of the military academy at West Point. Oh, look at that shit.
Look at that.
He's reluctant to enter what he called a snake pit, but the War Department insisted, and he obeyed.
Good little boy.
His wife occasionally came to visit. During his 3 years at West Point, Brevet Colonel Robert E. Lee improved the buildings and courses and spent much time with the cadets.
What else you got to do?
Right. Lee's eldest, George Washington Custis Lee, attended West Point during his tenure. Custis Lee graduated in 1854. First in his class,
Look at
even
that
outdid his
shit.
daddy. He made Robert E. Lee feel even worse about himself.
Second. I think that would make him prouder.
Right.
And his son finished first, right?
My goodness.
Well, Lee, he was enormously relieved to receive a long-awaited promotion as second in command of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Texas in 1855.
Fantastic.
It meant leaving the engineering corps and its sequence of staff jobs for the combat command he truly wanted.
Yeah.
He served under Colonel Albert Sidney Johnston at Camp Cooper, Texas. Their mission, protect settlers from attacks by the old Injuns.
Yeah.
Namely, the Apaches and the Comanche. The Apaches and Comanche, two brutal motherfuckers,
Yeah,
man.
that's some 1857, his daddy-in-law, George Washington Parke Custis, dead, creating a serious crisis when Lee took on the burden of executing the will. Custis' estate encompassed vast landholdings, hundreds of slaves, but also massive debt. The will required people formerly enslaved by Custis to be emancipated by my executors in such manner as to my executors may seem most expedient and proper. The said emancipation to be accomplished in not exceeding 5 years from the time of my decease.
Oh, look at that. Look at
This guy.
Look at this guy.
He's like, you be my slaves till I die.
And a little bit after. Right.
The estate was in disarray, and the plantations had been poorly managed, and they were losing money.
Well, Lee tried to hire an overseer to handle plantation in his absence. He wrote to his cousin, I wish to get an energetic, honest farmer who, while he will be considerate and kind to the Negroes, will be firm and make them do their duty.
Right.
But Lee failed to find a man for the job and had to take a 2-year leave of absence from the army to run the shit himself.
Damn.
Lee's more strict expectations and harsher punishments of the slaves, at Arlington Plantation nearly led to a revolt, since many of the enslaved people had been given to understand they were made to be free as soon as Custis died. They protested angrily at the delay. Like, what are we doing here? He's like, hey, man, I'm going to set you guys free.
Right.
But just, hey,
You guys are misinformed, man, but you don't even know how to read, so I'm going to tell you what it says.
you can speed your freedom up if you get this shit in
Right.
tip-top shape, guys.
Right. In May of 1858, he's like, yeah. May 1858, Lee wrote to his son Rooney, I've had some trouble with some of the people. Reuben, Parks, and Edward.
Oh.
In the beginning of the previous week, they rebelled against my authority, refused to obey my orders, and said they were as free as I was. I succeeded in capturing them and lodging them in jail. They resisted till overpowered and called upon other people to rescue them, quote unquote. Less than 2 months after they were sent to Alexandria jail, Lee decided to remove these 3 men and 3 female house slaves from Arlington, and he sent them under lock and key to the slave trader William Overton Winston in Richmond, who was instructed to keep them in jail until he could find good and responsible enslavers to work them until the end of the 5-year period. By 1860, only 1 family of the slaves was left intact on the estate.
Wow.
Some of the families had been together since their time at Mount Vernon. Damn.
And who lived on Mount Vernon, everybody?
Yeah, your bestie.
1859.
Who had more slaves than any other president combined.
Well,
Yeah.
the first 10.
Right.
The first 10 had some stuff. Well, Thomas Jefferson had kids with them slaves, so.
Yeah.
1859, 3 slaves at Arlington, Wesley Norris, his sister Mary, and a cousin of theirs, and others, fled for the north, but were captured a few miles from Pennsylvania border and forced to return to the plantation.
Oh, that sucks.
June 24th, 1859, the anti-slavery newspaper New York Daily Tribune, they published 2 anonymous letters dated June 19th and 21st, each claiming to have heard that Lee had the Norrises whipped, that the overseer refused to whip the woman, but that Lee took the whip and flogged her personally.
Oh, flogged her dolphin.
Maybe.
Lee privately wrote to his son Custis that the New York Tribune has attacked me for my treatment of your grandfather's slaves, but I shall not reply. He has left me an unpleasant legacy. Wesley Norris himself spoke about the incident after the war. He did that in an 1866 interview, which was printed in an abolitionist newspaper, the National Anti-Slavery Standard.
Well, not biased or anything.
Norris said that after they had been captured and forced to return to Arlington, Lee told them that he would teach us a lesson we would never forget.
According to him, Lee had the overseer tie the 3 of them firmly to posts and ordered them whipped. 50 lashes for the men, 20 for Mary.
Oh.
Norris claimed that Lee encouraged the whipping, and that when the overseer refused, called in the county constable to do it instead. Unlike the anonymous letter writers, he does not state that Lee himself whipped any of the enslaved people.
He didn't.
According to Norris, Lee frequently enjoined Constable Williams to lay it on well, an injunction which he did not fail to heed. Not satisfied with simply lacerating our naked flesh, General Lee then ordered the overseer to thoroughly wash our backs with brine. Which was done. That's salt, basically.
Yeah.
Damn. Dude. Rub it in. The Norsemen, they were then sent by Lee's agent to work on the railroads in Virginia and Alabama. According to an interview, Norris was sent to Richmond in January 1863, for which he says, from which place I finally made my escape through the rebel lines to freedom. But federal authorities reported that Norris came within their lines September 5th, 1863, and that he'd left Richmond with a pass from General Custis Lee. Oh. Liar.
Right.
Lee freed the people enslaved by Custis, including Wesley Norris, after the end of the 5-year period in the winter of 1862, filing the deed of manumission on December 29th, 1862.
Look at that.
So why'd he lie?
All right. Biographers of Lee, they've differed over the credibility of the account of the punishment as described in the letters in the Tribune and in Norris's personal account. They broadly agree that Lee sought to recapture a group of slaves who had escaped, and that after recapturing them, he hired them out off Arlington Plantation as a punishment. However, they disagree over the likelihood that Lee flogged them, and over the charge that he personally whipped Mary Norris. Yeah, it never happened. 1934, Douglas S. Freeman described the incident as Lee's first experience with the extravagance of irresponsible anti-slavery agitators. And he asserted that there is no evidence, direct or indirect, that Lee ever had them or any other Negroes flogged. The usage at Arlington and elsewhere in Virginia among people of Lee's station forbade such a thing.
Well, 2000, Michael Fellman, in The Making of Robert E. Lee, he found the claims that Lee had personally whipped Mary Norris extremely unlikely, but found it not at all unlikely that Lee had ordered the runaways whipped.
Right.
Corporal punishment, for which Lee substituted the euphemism firmness, was believed to be an intrinsic and necessary part of slave discipline.
Right.
Although it was supposed to be applied only in a calm and rational manner. How do you calmly whip somebody? But overtly physical domination of slaves, unchecked by law, was always brutal and potentially savage.
Lee biographer Elizabeth Brown Pryor concluded in 2008 that the facts are verifiable based on the consistency of 5 extant descriptions of the episode. The only element that is not repeatedly corroborated is the allegation that Lee gave the beatings himself, as well as the existence of an account book that indicates the constable received compensation from Lee on the date that this occurred.
Okay, so he chased him down, had him captured, and sent him off.
Right.
Well, in 2014, Michael Corda, whoever that guy is, wrote that although these letters are dismissed by most of Lee's biographers as exaggerated, or simply as unfounded abolitionist propaganda, it is hard to ignore them.
Right.
Seems incongruously out of character for Lee to have whipped a slave woman himself.
Right.
Particularly one stripped to the waist.
Oh.
And that charge may have been a flourish added by the two correspondents. It was not repeated by Wesley Norris when his account of the incident was published in 1866. Although it seems unlikely that he would have done any of the whipping himself. He may not have flinched from observing it to make sure his orders were carried out.
Right.
Of course, why would it?
Right. Several historians have noted they consider the contradictory nature of Lee's beliefs and actions concerning race and slavery. While Lee protested he had sympathetic feelings for the old blacks, they are subordinate to his own racial identity. While Lee held slavery to be an evil institution, he also saw some benefits to blacks held in slavery. While Lee helped assist individual slaves reach freedom in Liberia, provided for their emancipation in his own will, he believed slaves should be eventually freed in a general way, only at some unspecified future day, as a part of God's purpose. It was like when you trade for a baseball player to be named later.
Unspecified cash considerations. Right. Slavery for Lee was a moral and religious issue, and not one that would yield to political solutions.
Right.
Emancipation would sooner come from Christian impulse among slave masters before storms and tempests of fiery controversy, such as was occurring in the Bleeding Kansas. Countering Southerners who argued for slavery as a positive good, Lee, in his well-known analysis of slavery from an 1856 letter, called it a moral and political evil. While both Lee and his wife were disgusted with slavery, they also his wife. They also defended it against abolitionist demands for immediate emancipation for all enslaved.
Right. Lee argued that slavery was bad for white people, claiming that he found slavery bothersome and time-consuming as an everyday institution to run. 1856 letter to his wife, he maintained that slavery was a great evil, but primarily due to adverse impact that it had on white people. He said, "In this enlightened age, There are few, I believe, but what will acknowledge that slavery is an institution, is a moral and political evil in any country. It is useless to expatiate on its disadvantages. I think it, however, a greater evil to the white man than to the black race. While my feelings are strongly enlisted in behalf of the latter, my sympathies are more strong for the former. The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race.
Oh, no.
And I hope will prepare and lead them to better things. How long their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise, merciful providence.
Wow. Well, before leaving to serve in Mexico, Lee had written a will providing for the manumission of the slaves he owned. A woman and her children inherited from his mother and apparently leased to his father-in-law and later sold to him. That's Lee's father-in-law, G.W. Parke Custis, was a member of the American Colonization Society, which was formed to gradually end slavery by establishing a free republic in Liberia for African Americans.
Fantastic.
And Lee assisted several formerly enslaved people to immigrate there.
Oh.
Also, according to historian Richard McCaslin, Lee was a gradual emancipationist, denouncing extremist proposals for the immediate abolition of slavery.
Okay. Lee rejected what he called evilly motivated political passion, fearing a civil and servile war from precipitous emancipation. Historian Elizabeth Brown Pryor offered an alternative interpretation of Lee's voluntary manumission of slaves in his will, and assisting slaves to a life of freedom in Liberia. Seeing Lee as a conforming to a primacy of slave law, she wrote that Lee's private views on race and slavery were, which today seems startling, were entirely unremarkable in Lee's world.
Oh, shit!
No visionary, Lee nearly always tried to conform to accepted opinions. His assessment of black inferiority, of the necessity of racial stratification, the primacy of slave law, and even a divine sanction for it all, was in keeping with the prevailing views of other moderate slaveholders and a good many prominent Northerners.
Okay, yes. Well, even before what Michael Fellman called a sorry involvement in actual slave management, Lee judged the experience of white mastery to be a greater moral evil to the white man than blacks suffering under the painful discipline of slavery, which introduced Christianity, literacy, and a work ethic to the heathen African.
Oh.
Columbia University historian Eric Foner, he notes, Lee was not a pro-slavery ideologue, but I think equally important is that, unlike some white Southerners, he never spoke out against slavery.
Not publicly.
Right. Silence is violence, or whatever the hell they say, right?
Right. Idiots. By the time of Lee's career in the United States Army, the officers of West Point stood aloof from political party and sectional strife on such issues as slavery, as a matter of principle, and Lee adhered to this precedent. He considered it his patriotic duty to be apolitical while in active armed service.
Yeah.
And Lee did not speak out publicly on the subject of slavery prior to the Civil War. During the outbreak of the war in 1860, Lee voted for Southern Democratic nominee and incumbent Vice President John Breckinridge, who was the pro-slavery candidate in 1860 election and had supported the Lecompton Constitution for Kansas rather than Constitutional Union Party nominee John Bell, the Southern Unionist candidate who won Virginia, and voted against the admission of Kansas under the Lecompton Constitution as a United States Senator from Tennessee.
Right.
All right, Breckinridge.
Lee himself enslaved a small number of people in his lifetime and considered himself a paternalistic master. I'm a daddy. There are various historical and newspaper hearsay accounts of Lee's personally whipping a slave, but they are not a direct eyewitness account.
Right.
He was definitely involved in administering the day-to-day operations of a plantation and was involved in the recapture of runaway slaves.
Yeah, you got to.
One historian noted that Lee separated families of enslaved people, something that prominent enslaving families in Virginia such as Washington and Custis did not do.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
December 29th, 1862, the last day he was allowed to legally retain them, Lee finally freed all the enslaved people that his wife had inherited from her daddy, and according to her daddy's will.
Oh, finally did it. He didn't have to wait the 5 years to do it, or did he?
Well, those ones that ran away, he definitely was making them wait.
Right, you sons of bitches. Before this, Lee had petitioned the courts to keep people enslaved by Custis longer than the 5 years allotted in Custis' will.
Oh.
Since the estate was still in debt, but the courts rejected his appeals.
Oh,
wow.
Even in the South? Wow.
Foner, he writes, Lee's code of gentlemanly conduct did not seem to apply to blacks during the war. He did not stop his soldiers from kidnapping free black farmers and selling them into slavery. Princeton University historian James McPherson noted that Lee initially rejected a prisoner exchange between the Confederacy and the Union when the old Bluecoats demanded that black Union soldiers be included.
He did indeed.
Lee did not accept the swap until a few months before the Confederacy's surrender. He also called the Emancipation Proclamation a savage and brutal policy, which leaves us no alternative but success or degradation worse than death. Oh, wow.
Okay. As the war dragged on and Lee's losses mounted, he eventually advocated enlisting enslaved people in the Confederate Army in exchange for freedom. However, he came to this position with great reluctance. In an 1865 letter to his friend Andrew Hunter, he says, "Considering the relation of master and slave, controlled by humane laws and influenced by Christianity and an enlightened public sentiment, as the best that can exist between the white and black races while intermingled as at present in this country, I would deprecate any sudden disturbance of that relation unless it be necessary to avert a greater calamity to both. I should therefore prefer to rely upon our white population to preserve the ratio between our forces and those of the enemy, which experience has shown to be safe.
Right.
But in view of the preparations of our enemies, it is our duty to provide for continued war and not for a battle or a campaign. I fear that we cannot accomplish this without overtaxing the capacity of our whites."
Right.
Right. He's like, we're going to lose a lot of whites, so we probably should bring some of these black guys here.
After the war, Lee told a congressional committee that blacks were not disposed to work, and he also said that the blacks did not possess the intellectual capacity to vote and participate in politics. What the fuck? Lee also said to the committee that he hoped that Virginia could get rid of them, referring to blacks. Wow. What do you mean?
What do you mean, get rid of them?
Right. While not politically active, Lee defended Lincoln's successor Andrew Johnson's approach to Reconstruction, which, according to Foner, abandoned the former slaves to the mercy of governments controlled by their former owners. It's true.
According to Foner, again, a word from Lee might have encouraged white Southerners to accord blacks equal rights and inhibited the violence against the freed people that swept the region during Reconstruction, but he chose to remain silent.
Right.
Lee was also urged to condemn the white supremacy KKK, but opted to remain silent on them as well.
Wow.
In the generation following the war, Lee, though he died just a few years later, became a central figure in the lost cause interpretation of the war. We'll have an episode on that old theory. The argument that Lee had always opposed slavery and freed the people enslaved by his wife helped maintain his stature as a symbol of Southern honor and national reconciliation.
Right.
Reconciliation.
Both Harper's Ferry and the secession of Texas were monumental events leading up to the Civil War. Lee was at both events.
Oh, jeez.
He initially remained loyal to the Union after Texas succeeded, though. But then Harper's Ferry came. John Brown, he led a band of 21 abolitionists who seized the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. This was in October of 1859. He was hoping to incite a slave rebellion. President James Buchanan gave Lee command of detachments of militia, soldiers, and United States Marines. He goes, "Go suppress the uprising and arrest its leaders."
By the time Lee arrived, the militia on the site had surrounded Brown and his hostages. At dawn, Brown refused to demand for a surrender. Lee attacked, and Brown and his followers were captured after 3 minutes of fighting.
Wow.
Lee's summary report of the episode shows Lee believed it was the attempt of a fanatic or madman.
Right.
Lee said Brown achieved temporary success by creating a panic and confusion and by magnifying the number of participants involved in the raid.
1860, Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee relieved Major Heitzelman at Fort Brown, and the Mexican authorities offered to restrain their citizens from making predatory descents upon the territory and the people of Texas. This was the last active operation of the Cortina War. Rip Ford, rip. A Texas Ranger at that time, he described Lee as dignified without hauteur, grand without pride. He was a very calm, self-possessed man and in complete control of his passions. He possessed the capacity to accomplish great ends and the gift of controlling and leading men.
When Texas seceded in February of 1861, General David Twiggs, he surrendered all the American forces, which is about 4,000 men, including Lee. And so look at you, Lee, just getting surrendered all the time.
All right.
And commander of the Department of Texas to the Texans. Twiggs immediately resigned from the Army and was made a Confederate general. Oh, you think he did that on purpose?
Oh, maybe.
That's crazy. Lee went back to Washington and was appointed colonel of the 1st Regiment of Cavalry in March of 1861. Lee's colonelcy was signed by the new president, Abe. I know personally, I can call him that. 3 weeks after his promotion, Colonel Lee, he was offered a senior command with the rank of Major General in the expanded army to fight the southern states. But Fort Mason, Texas, was Lee's last command with the United States Army.
Take a look at the old Civil War. Unlike many Southerners who expected a glorious war,
Glorious!
Lee correctly predicted it is a protracted and devastating war. So it's not going to be
I don't
fun.
think you have to be a genius to predict a war is going to be
Right.
devastating.
Right.
I don't know what protracted means.
He privately opposed the new Confederate States of America in letters in early 1861, denouncing secession as nothing but revolution and an unconstitutional betrayal of the efforts of the Founding Fathers. See, you get it. Writing to George Washington Custis in January, Lee stated, "The South, in my opinion, has been aggrieved by the acts of the North, as you say. I feel their aggression and am willing to take every proper step for redress. It is a principle I contend for, not individual or private benefit. As an American citizen, I take great pride in my country, her prosperity and institutions, and would defend any state if her rights were invaded." Oh, not just Virginia, huh? "But I can anticipate no greater calamity,
Shane?
right, for the country than a dissolution of the Union.
Yeah.
It would be an accumulation of all the evils," he likes the word evils, "of all the evils we complain of, and I'm willing to sacrifice everything but honor for its preservation. I hope, therefore,"
Well, you sacrifice your honor.
right, "I hope, therefore, that all constitutional means will be exhausted before there is a resort to force. Secession is nothing but revolution. The framers of our Constitution never exhausted so much labor, wisdom, and forbearance in its formation, and surrounded it with so many guards and securities if it was intended to be broken by every member of the Confederacy at will. It was intended for perpetual union, so expressed in the preamble, and for the establishment of a government, not a compact, which can only be dissolved by revolution or the consent of all the people in convention assembly."
Well, all that, despite opposing secession, Lee said in January that we can, with a clear conscience, separate if all peaceful means failed. Yeah.
Right.
He agreed with secessionists in most areas, rejecting the northern abolitionist criticisms and their prevention of the expansion of slavery to the new western territories,
Oh.
and the fear of North's larger population.
Right.
Lee supported the Crittenden Compromise, which would have constitutionally protected slavery.
All right.
Lee's objection to secession was ultimately outweighed by a sense of personal honor, reservations about the legitimacy of a strife-ridden union that can only be maintained by swords and bayonets, and his duty to defend his native Virginia if attacked.
Okay. He was asked while leaving Texas by a lieutenant if he intended to fight for the Orebs or the Bluecoats, to which Lee replied, "I shall never bear arms against the Union, but it may be necessary for me to carry a musket in the defense of my native state, Virginia, in which case I shall not prove recreant to my duty."
Dude, that sounds so stupid.
Right.
The forebears are the writers, framers of the Constitution, and all this shit about the Union and blah, 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 but not my state of Virginia.
But he contradicts himself. "I shall never bear arms against the Union." Well, you can't say "shall never" then.
Right. Jeez.
"The only way I'll bear arms against the Union."
As if they attack my sweet, sweet Virginia.
Although Virginia had the most slaves of any state, it was more similar to Maryland,
Okay.
which stayed in the Union. It was more similar to Maryland than to the Deep South. A convention voted against secession in early 1861. Winfield Scott, commanding general of the Union Army and Lee's mentor, told Lincoln he wanted him for a top command, telling Secretary of War Simon Cameron that he had entire confidence in Lee. Lee accepted a promotion to colonel of the 1st Cavalry Regiment on the 28th of March, 1861, again swearing an oath to the United States and its Constitution.
So the ultimate traitor.
Right.
Well, meanwhile, Lee ignored an offer of command from the Confederacy. After Lincoln's call for troops to put down the rebellion, a Second Virginia Convention in Richmond voted to secede.
Uh-oh.
That was April 17th. And a May 23rd referendum would likely ratify the decision.
Okay.
By a whole month. That night, Lee dined with Brother Smith and Cousin Phillips, who were naval officers. Because of Lee's indecision, Phillips went to the War Department the next morning to warn that the Union might lose his cousin if the government did not act quickly.
Oh.
You gotta talk Virginia out of seceding or something, because he's gonna go with them.
Oh, Bobby Lee, he's gone. Washington that day. Lee was offered by presidential advisor Francis Blair a role as a major general to command the defense of the national capital. Lee replied to Blair, Mr. Blair, I look upon secession as anarchy. If I owned the 4 millions of slaves in the South, I would sacrifice them to the Union in 5 years. But how can I draw my sword upon Virginia, my native state?
Well, you're not. Go to fight in a different state.
Right. I'll fight for the Union, but I'm not going in Virginia.
Stupid.
Lee immediately went
because he knew
Right.
Virginia was going to be the center.
Right. Lee immediately went to Winfield Scott, who tried to persuade him that Union forces would be large enough to prevent the South from even fighting. So he would not even have to oppose this state. Lee was like, I don't think so. You know what's going on down there? Guys are pissed. When Lee asked if he could go home and not fight, the fellow Virginian said that the army did not need equivocal soldiers, and that if he wanted to resign, he should do so before receiving official orders. Winfield Scott told him that Lee had made the greatest mistake of your life.
Well, Lee agreed that to avoid dishonor, he had to resign before receiving unwanted orders. Yeah, once you get the orders, you kind of got to go, right? Yeah. If you don't want to be dishonorable.
Right.
While historians have usually called his decision inevitable, the answer he was born to make, an author called it, or a historian called it.
Right.
Another one called it an no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
Given his ties to the family and state, an 1871 letter from his eldest daughter, Mary Custis Lee, to a biographer described Lee as worn and harassed, yet calm as he deliberated alone in his office.
Okay.
People on the street noticed Lee's grim face as he tried to decide over the next 2 days. And he later said that he kept the resignation letter for a day before sending it after he smoked a blunt on April 20th.
Damn right. 2 days later, the Richmond Convention invited Lee to the city. That convention elected him as commander of Virginia State Forces before his arrival on the 23rd of April, and almost immediately gave George Washington's sword as symbol of his appointment.
Oh, damn.
Damn. Whether he was told of a decision he did not want without time to decide, or did want the excitement and opportunity of command is unclear.
He knew what he was doing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, cousin on Scott's staff told the family that Lee's decision so upset Scott that he collapsed on a sofa and mourned as if he had lost a son.
No.
And he asked, I never want to hear his name again. When Lee told family his decision, he said, I suppose you will all think I have done very wrong, as the others are mostly pro-Union.
Oh, wow.
Only Mary Custis was a secessionist. His daughter? Yeah. And her mother especially wanted to choose the Union, but told her husband that she would support whatever you want, dear. Many younger men, like Nephew Fitzhugh, he wanted to support the Confederacy. But Lee's 3 sons joined the Confederate military only after their father's decision.
Right.
So they were going wherever you were.
Right. Most family members, like Brother Smith, also reluctantly... Are we talking about the Mormons or something?
Brother Jebediah.
Most family members, like Brother Smith, also reluctantly chose the South. But Smith's wife and Anne,
Yeah, that's crazy, dude.
Lee's sister, still supported the Union. Wow, tore families apart, man. Anne's son joined the Union Army, and no one in his family ever spoke to Lee again.
Crazy.
Many cousins fought for the rebels, but Phillips and John Fitzgerald told Lee in person that they would uphold their oaths to the United States of America. John H. Upshur stayed with the Union military despite much family pressure. Roger Jones stayed in the Union Army after Lee refused to advise him on what to do. And he's like, I can't tell you what to do, bud. And 2 of Philip Fendel's sons fought for the Union as well. 40% of Virginian officers stayed with the North.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's unexpected.
Right, unexpected. After the outbreak of war, Lee was appointed to command all of Virginia's forces, which then encompassed the Provisional Army of Virginia and the Virginia State Militia. Navy.
Yep.
He was appointed a major general by the Virginia governor, but upon the formation of the Confederate States Army, he was named one of its first 5 full generals.
Oh.
Lee did not want to wear the insignia of a Confederate general, but only the 3 stars of a Confederate colonel, equivalent to his last U.S. Army rank.
Right.
He did not intend to wear a general's insignia until the Civil War had been won and he could be promoted.
Right.
In peacetime to general in the Army of the Confederates.
Right. Damn.
And he never did.
No. Lee's first field assignment was commanding Confederate forces in West Virginia, where he was defeated at the Battle of Cheat Mountain and was widely blamed for Confederate setbacks. He was then sent to organize the coastal defenses along the Carolina and Georgia coast, appointed commander, Department of the South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida on the 5th of November, 1861. Between then and the fall of Fort Pulaski, April 11th, 1862. He put in place a defense of Savannah that proved successful in blocking Federal advance on Savannah itself. Confederate fort and naval gunnery dictated nighttime movement and construction by the besiegers.
Federal preparations required 4 months. In those 4 months, Lee developed a defense in depth. Behind Fort Pulaski on the Savannah River, Fort Jackson was improved. 2 additional batteries covered river approaches.
All right.
In the face of the Union superiority in naval, artillery, and infantry deployment, Lee was able to block any Federal advance on Savannah, and at the same time, well-trained Georgia troops were released in time to meet McClellan's Peninsula campaign.
Okay.
The city of Savannah would not fall, obviously, until Sherman's march to the sea at the end of 1864.
Yeah. At first, the press spoke to the disappointment of losing Fort Pulaski. Surprised by the effectiveness of large caliber Parrott rifles in their first deployment, it was widely speculated that only betrayal could have brought overnight surrender to a third system fort. Lee was said to have failed to get effective support in the Savannah River from the 3 side-wheeler gunboats of the Georgia Navy. Although again blamed by the press for the Confederate reverses, he was appointed military advisor to the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. While in Richmond, Lee was ridiculed as the King of Spades for his excessive digging of trenches around the capital. These trenches would later play a pivotal role in battles near the end of the war.
Sure would. Well, spring of 1862, during the Peninsula Campaign, the Union Army of the Potomac under McClellan, they advanced on Richmond from Fort Monroe.
McClellan.
Progressing up the peninsula, McClellan forced General Joseph Johnston and the Army of Virginia to retreat to a point just north and east of the Confederate capital. Johnson, he was wounded at the Battle of Seven Pines, June 1st, 1862, giving Lee his first opportunity to lead an army in the field.
Oh.
Force he renamed the Army of Northern Virginia,
Okay.
signaling confidence that the Union Army could be driven away from Richmond.
Ooh. Early in the war, Lee had been called Granny Lee for his allegedly timid style of command. Confederate newspaper editorials objected to him replacing Johnston, opining that Lee would be passive, waiting for the Union attack.
You think so?
This seemed true initially. For the first 3 weeks of June, Lee did not show any aggression at all. Instead, he just strengthened Richmond's defenses. He's like, how can we have a country if we don't have defenses?
Right. Well, however, June 25th, he surprised the Army of the Potomac and launched a rapid series of bold attacks, which were the 7 days battles. Despite superior Union numbers and some clumsy tactical performances by his subordinates, Lee's attacks derailed McClellan's plans and drove back most of his forces. Confederate casualties were heavy, but an unnerved McClellan, famed for his caution, what did he do? He did what he always did. The old retreater himself went 25 miles to the lower James River and abandoned the peninsula completely in August.
Yeah.
And he thought he was going to win the presidency against Lincoln.
So many times the war could have been over with these. Lee was pretty much done and over with, and McClellan was just like, let's hold back.
Let's get back here, guys.
Come on, we did enough for today. This success changed Confederate morale and the public's regard for Lee. After the 7-day battles, and until the end of the war, his men called him Marse Robert, a term of respect and affection.
Aw.
Well, the setback and the resultant drop in Union morale impelled Lincoln to adopt a new policy of relentless, committed warfare. After the 7-day battle, Lincoln decided that he had to move to emancipate most Confederate slaves by executive order as a military act, using his authority as commander-in-chief. He had to make this possible. He needed a Union victory.
They didn't need one, but he didn't want to do it and sound desperate and look desperate.
Right, he needed, yeah.
Well, wheeling to the north, Lee marched rapidly towards Washington, D.C., and defeated another Union army under General John Pope at the Second Battle of Bull Run.
Yeah,
that was in late August.
He did win that one.
He eliminated Pope before reinforcements from McClellan arrived, knocking out an entire field command before another could arrive to support it. In less than 90 days, Lee had run McClellan off the peninsula, defeated Pope, and moved the battle lines 82 miles north, from 6 miles north of Richmond to 20 miles south of Washington.
Senor Duck.
He said, you get away from my beloved Virginia.
Right, you get away. Lee chose to take the battle off southern ground, and he invaded Maryland and Pennsylvania, hoping to collect supplies in Union territory, possibly win a victory that would sway the upcoming Union elections in favor of ending the war. This was sent amiss when McClellan's men found a lost Confederate dispatch, Special Order 191.
Yep.
It revealed Lee's plans and movements. Idiot. McClellan always exaggerated Lee's numerical strength, But now he knew the Confederate Army was divided and could be destroyed in detail.
But do you think he did it?
No,
Because still in a characteristic manner, McClellan moved slowly.
he did.
He failed to realize a spy had informed Lee that he possessed the plans. Lee quickly concentrated his forces west of Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, Maryland, where McClellan did indeed attack September 17th. That resulted in the Battle of Antietam and was the single bloodiest day of the war, with
So
both
far.
sides suffering enormous losses. No, literally.
Ever.
Lee's army barely withstood the Union assaults and retreated to Virginia the next day.
So stupid. They could have just kept on rolling.
The narrow Confederate defeat gave President Abe the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation, which put the Confederacy on the diplomatic and moral defensive.
Right. Disappointed by McClellan's failure to destroy Lee's army, Lincoln said, "You know what? You're out, bud. Ambrose, Burnside, let's go." He appointed him to a commander of the Army of the Potomac. Burnside ordered an attack across the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg, which is in Virginia. Delays in bridging the river allowed Lee's army ample time to organize strong defenses. And the old Blue Coat frontal assault on the 13th of December, 1862, disaster.
Yeah.
There were 12,600 Union casualties to only 5,000 rebels, making the engagement one of the most one-sided battles in the Civil War.
Sure was. After this victory, Lee reportedly said, "It is well that war is so terrible, else we should grow too fond of it." I like what we're doing.
Nice.
At Fredericksburg, according to historian Michael Fahlman, Lee had completely entered into the spirit of war, where destructiveness took on its own beauty. This bitter defeat for the Union at Fredericksburg prompted Lincoln to appoint Joseph Hooker. He said, "Step on up, you're the next contestant on Commander of the Army of the Potomac."
Hey, all right.
May of 1863, Hooker maneuvered to attack Lee's army by crossing the Rappahannock further upriver and positioned himself at the Chancellorsville Crossroads. Oh, poor Stoney.
Yeah. Doing this could give him an opportunity to strike Lee in the rear. But the Confederate general barely managed to pivot his forces in time to face an attack. Hooker's command was nearly twice the size of Lee's, but he nonetheless was beaten up badly after Lee performed a daring movement that broke all terms of conventional warfare, dividing his army.
Yep.
Lee sent Stonewall Jackson's corps to attack Hooker's exposed flank on the opposite side of the battlefield. The significant victory that followed came with a price. Among the heavy casualties was Jackson himself. His finest corps commander, accidentally fired upon by his own man in the middle of the woods at night. You can't do that.
Yep. And Lee reportedly said, "I've lost my right arm." Coincidentally enough,
Right.
Jackson lost his right arm and got buried separately from it.
True.
Left arm, one of them. Even though he scored another impressive victory over an enemy army much larger than his own, Lee felt unsatisfied by the fact that he had made little territorial gains up to the point.
Okay.
They were going poorly for the Confederacy in the West, and Lee started to grow restless. He devised a plan to once again invade the North for similar reasons as before. One, relieve Virginia and its citizens of the weariness of the battle, and potentially march on the federal capital and force terms of peace.
All right. So that was that. And now, the turning point of the war, Battle of Gettysburg. Critical decisions came in May and June of 1863 after Lee's smashing victory at Battle of Chancellorsville. The Western Front was crumbling as multiple uncoordinated Confederate armies were unable to handle General Grant's campaign against Vicksburg. Top military fighters wanted to save Vicksburg, but Lee persuaded Davis to overrule them and authorize yet another invasion of the North. Well, the immediate goal was to acquire urgently needed supplies from the rich farming districts of Pennsylvania. A long-term goal was to stimulate peace activity in the North by demonstrating the power of the South to invade. Like, if we just invade the South and, just come up really quick, maybe.
North.
Yeah, if we invade the North and just come up really quick, maybe we just get a truce, Lee's decision proved a significant strategic blunder and cost the old Rebs the control of their western regions and nearly cost Lee his own army as Union forces cut him off from the south.
They sure did. Well, Lee launched the Gettysburg campaign when he abandoned his position on the Rappahannock and crossed the Potomac River into Maryland in June. Hooker mobilized his men and pursued, but was replaced by General George Meade June 28th, just a few days before the two armies clashed at the town of Gettysburg. The battle produced the largest numbers of casualties in the American Civil War. Some of Lee's subordinates were new and inexperienced, which Jeb Stuart's cavalry failed to perform effective reconnaissance.
The first day was a surprise affair for both sides, and the old Rebs managed to rally their forces first, pushing the panicked Union troops away from the town and towards key terrain that should have been taken by General Ewell, but was not. The second day unfolded differently for the Confederates. They took too much time to assemble and launched repeated failed assaults against the Union left flank over difficult terrain. Lee's decision on the third day, going against the advice of his best corps commander, General Longstreet. How could you go against General James? Longstreet was against launching a massive frontal assault on the center of the Union line, and it happened anyway. And guess what happened? Disastrous.
Yeah, all because over the wide field that it was carried out on, and the incident known as Pickett's Charge.
Yeah, Pickett's Charge, guys. Ooh, that's rough.
Easily repulsed Pickett's Charge, named after the general, obviously. It resulted in severe Confederate losses.
It did.
Lee rode out to meet the remains of the division and proclaimed, "All this has been my fault."
Of course it was, you moron.
He had no choice but to withdraw, and he escaped Meade's ineffective pursuit, go figure, slipping back into Virginia. Following his defeat at Gettysburg, Lee sent a letter of resignation to President Davis on August 8, 1863, but Davis said, "Don't be a pussy nanny, boy. Fucking get out there, dude."
Right.
He's like, "Oh, look at my dad. Oh."
I fear I'm not a good leader.
I led my men to slaughter. How could I live with myself?
Brother Longstreet told me this would happen. That very fall of 1863, Lee and Meade, they would meet again in two minor campaigns, the Bristow and Mine Run. It did little to change the strategic standoff, though. The Confederate Army never fully recovered from the substantial losses incurred during the three-day battle in southern Pennsylvania, known as Gettysburg. Civil War historian Shelby Foote once stated, just once though, Gettysburg was the price the South paid for having Robert E. Lee as commander. Oh, wow.
Damn, that's harsh, dude.
Damn, Shelby.
1864, the new Union fucking hotshot.
Yeah.
Fucking big hoss himself, Ulysses S. Grant. He sought to use his large advantages in manpower.
He had a pistol in one hand and a flask in the other.
Yeah, decided to use those and material resources to destroy Lee's army in attrition, pinning Lee against his capital of Richmond.
He did. He took him off at the knees.
Yeah, Lee successfully stopped each attack, but Grant, with his superior numbers, kept pushing each time a bit further to the southeast.
Yeah.
These battles, they were the Overland Campaign. They included the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Cold Harbor.
Okay. Grant was eventually able to stealthily move his army across the James River.
Legitimately.
Right. After stopping a Union attempt to capture Petersburg, Virginia, a vital railroad link supplying Richmond, Lee's men built elaborate trenches and were besieged in Petersburg
For fucking ever.
Right. A long time, like 10 months.
It's actually when Grant grew his beard. That's how much time they were there.
A development which presaged the trench warfare of World War I.
Yeah.
Lee attempted to break the stalemate by sending Juba Early on a raid through the Shenandoah Valley to Washington, D.C. But Early was defeated early on by the superior forces of Philip Sheridan. The siege of Petersburg lasted from June 1864 until March of 1865.
Good Lord.
With Lee's outnumbered and poorly supplied army shrinking daily because of desertions by disheartened rebels.
Like, dude, all we're doing is frickin' sitting here, man.
Yeah.
February 6, 1865, Lee, he was appointed General-in-Chief of the armies of the Confederate States. Woo. As the South ran out of manpower, the issue of arming the slaves became paramount. Lee explained, "We should employ them without delay, along with gradual and general emancipation." The first units of these guys were in training as the war ended. Well, as the Confederate Army was devastated by casualties, disease, and desertion, the Union attack on Petersburg succeeded April 2nd, 1865. Lee abandoned Richmond and retreated west.
Yeah, the war's over.
And it's all over.
It's over. It's all over but the crying. Lee then made an attempt to escape to the southwest and join up with Joseph Johnston's Army of Tennessee in North Carolina. However, his forces were soon surrounded, and he surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, April 9th, 1865, the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. Other rebel armies followed suit, and the war ended. Day after his surrender, Lee issued his farewell address to his army.
Well, Lee resisted calls by some officers to reject surrender and allow small units to melt away into the mountains, setting up a lengthy guerrilla war. He insisted the war was over and energetically campaigned for intersectional reconciliation.
Right. It's like, we tried.
So far from engaging in a war to perpetuate slavery, I'm rejoiced that slavery is abolished. I believe it will be greatly for the interest of the South.
Right.
Well, good for you, bud.
Right.
You could have just spoke out like that before the war, and maybe,
Right.
maybe this could have been put to nip it in the bud.
Nipping in the bud. After the war, Lee was not arrested or even punished, although he was indicted.
Indicted! He should have been,
He was
dude.
running around Virginia. Indicted!
Literally left his freaking army post to go fucking post up with the traitors.
Yeah. But he did lose the right to vote, as well as some property.
As well as he should have.
Lee's pre-war family home, the Custis Lee Mansion, it was seized by Union forces during the war and turned into Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, now you got a bunch of Union guys buried on your homeland that you wanted to defend.
And his family was not compensated until more than a decade. After
Shouldn't
his
have been
death.
anyways.
Right.
Whatever.
That's nice.
In 1866, Lee counseled Southerners not to resume fighting, which prompted Grant to say that he was setting an example of forced acquiescence, so grudging and pernicious in its effects as to be hardly realized.
Okay.
Lee joined with Democrats in opposing the radical Republicans who demanded punitive measures against the South, distrusted the South's commitment to the abolition of slavery, and indeed distrusted the region's loyalty to the United States.
I would too for a minute.
Right, like you guys were all just gung-ho for 4 years to not be a part of the United States. We're just supposed to assume you're just going to conform right back to what we want.
Lee supported a system of free public schools for black people, but opposed allowing them to vote. He said, my own opinion is that at this time, the black Southerners cannot vote intelligently, and that giving them the right to vote would lead to a great deal of demagogism. And lead to embarrassments. And lead to embarrassments in various ways. What kind of ways? You can't just say that. Emory Thomas says Lee had become a suffering Christ-like icon. Whoa. For ex-Confederates.
Of course they are. Still is.
President Grant invited him to the White House in 1869, and he went.
Should never been allowed to step foot in the damn White House.
Nationally, Lee became an icon of reconciliation between the white people of North and South and the reintegration of former Confederates into the national fabric.
Well, Lee hoped to retire to a farm of his own, but he was too much a regional symbol to live in obscurity. From April to June 1865, he and his family resided at Richmond at the Stuart Lee House. He accepted an offer to serve as the president of Washington College, which is now called Washington and Lee University.
Oh, it's
Surprised that hasn't been
It's still called that? Wow.
Served from October 1865 until his death.
Fantastic.
The trustees used his famous name in large-scale fundraising appeals, and Lee transformed Washington College into a leading Southern college, expanding its offerings significantly, adding programs in the commerce and journalism, plus incorporating the Lexington Law School. Oh, look at you guys.
He was well liked by the students, which enabled him to announce an honor system like that of West Point, and explaining that we have but one rule here, and it is that every student be a gentleman.
I'm going to go ahead and take a guess that women are not allowed in here.
Right. To speed up national reconciliation, Lee recruited students from the North and made certain that they were all well treated on campus and also in town.
Several glowing appraisals of Lee's tenure as college president have survived, depicting the dignity and respect he commanded among all. Previously, most students had been obliged to occupy the campus dormitories, while only the most mature were ever allowed off campus, to live off campus.
Right.
Lee quickly reversed this rule, requiring most students to board off campus, so get the hell out of here,
Right.
and allowing only the most mature to live in the dorms as a mark of privilege. The results of this policy were considered a success.
Fantastic.
Right. Like, you degenerates, get the hell off of campus.
Right.
And only you good ones can stay and hold up the reputation.
A typical account by a professor there states that the students fairly worshipped him and deeply dreaded his displeasure. Yet so kind, affable, and gentle was he toward them that all loved to approach him. No student would have dared to violate General Lee's expressed wish or appeal. While at Washington College, Lee told a colleague that the greatest mistake of his lifetime was taking a military education. He also defended his daddy in a biographical sketch.
Okay. His deader dad.
Right.
He's not a deadbeat. He's not a deadbeat dad. He's a deadbeat dad.
Right.
May 29th, 1865. Oh, A.J. himself, President A.J. Johnson. Well, I don't know his middle name. He issued a proclamation of amnesty and pardon to persons who had participated in the rebellion against the United States. There were 14 accepted classes, and members of those classes had to make special application to the president. Lee sent an application to Grant and wrote to President Johnson on June 13th, 1865. He said, being excluded from the provisions of amnesty and pardon contained in the proclamation of the 29th ulto, I hereby apply for the benefits and full restoration of all rights and privileges extended to those included in its terms. I graduated at the military academy at West Point in June 1829. Trader resigned from the U.S. Army April 61. Trader was a general in the Confederate Army. Trader and included in the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia April 9th, 1865. Trader.
Wow. 2nd of October, 1865, the same day that Lee was inaugurated as president of Washington College, he signed his amnesty oath, thereby complying fully with the provision of Johnson's proclamation. Lee was not pardoned, nor was his citizenship restored. 3 years later, on the 25th of December, 1868, everybody's opening up the presents that Santa left them the night before. Johnson proclaimed a second amnesty, which removed previous exemptions, such as the one that affected Lee.
Awesome. Let's take a look at some of his little post-war politics.
Oh.
Lee, who had opposed secession and remained mostly indifferent to politics before the war, he supported Andrew Johnson's plan of Reconstruction that took effect 1865 to 66.
All right.
However, he opposed the Congressional Republican program that took effect in 1867. February of 1866, though, he was called to testify before the Joint Congressional Committee on Reconstruction in Washington, where he expressed support for Johnson's plans for a quick restoration of the former Confederate state. He also argued that the restoration should return as far as possible to the status quo ante in the southern states' governments, with the obviously exception of slavery.
Right.
Everything should go back to normal how it was, just
Right.
no more owning human beings.
Right. Lee told the committee that everyone with whom I associate expresses kind feeling towards the freedmen. They wish to see them get into the world, and particularly to take up some occupation for a living, and to turn their hands to some work.
As if they weren't,
Right.
doing that already.
And he also said, where I am and have been, the people have exhibited a willingness that the blacks should be educated, and that it would be better for the blacks and for the whites. However, when he was asked, General, you are very competent to judge of the capacity of black men for acquiring knowledge. I want your opinion on that capacity as compared with the capacity of white men.
Oh, here we go.
Ooh, man.
Lee replied,
Oh, fuck.
I do not think that he is as capable of acquiring knowledge as the white man is. In an interview in May of 1866, Lee said, the Radical Party are likely to do a great deal of harm, for we wish now for good feeling to grow up between the North and South and the President, Mr. Johnson. He's been doing much to strengthen the feeling in favor of the Union among us.
Okay.
The relations between the Negroes and the whites were friendly formerly, and would remain so if legislation be not passed in favor of the blacks, in a way that will only do them harm.
1868, Lee's ally, Alexander H. Stewart, drafted a public letter of endorsement for the Democratic Party's presidential campaign, in which Horatio Seymour ran against Lee's old foe, Republican Grant.
Opo. What up, Opo?
What up, Opo? That's my OF. Lee signed along with 31 other ex-Confederates. The Democratic campaign, eager
why didn't he stick up for his boy Grant that frickin' defended him for years after the war?
Right. Democratic campaign, eager to publicize the endorsement, published a statement widely in newspapers. Their letter claimed paternalistic concern for the welfare of freed Southern blacks.
Stop acting like your daddies, man.
Right. Stating that the idea that the Southern people are hostile to the Negroes and would oppress them if it were in their power to do so is entirely unfounded. Do
you not realize we just fought a damn war where you guys were doing this?
They have grown up in our midst, and we have been accustomed from childhood to look upon them with kindness, you lying motherfucker.
However, it also called for the restoration of white political rule, arguing that it is true that the people of the South, in common with a large majority of the people of the North and West, are, for obvious reasons, inflexibly opposed to any system of laws that would place the political power of the country in the hands of those damn Negroes. But this opposition springs from no feeling of enmity but from a deep-seated conviction that, at present, the Negroes have neither the intelligence nor the other qualifications which are necessary to make them safe depositories of political power.
What are those other qualifications? I bet they have at least one or two of them. Can they breathe?
In his public statements and private correspondence, Lee, he argued that a tone of reconciliation and patience would further the interests of white Southerners better than hot-headed antagonism to federal authority or the use of violence.
Right.
Lee repeatedly expelled white students from Washington College for violent attacks on local black men.
Damn right.
And publicly urged obedience to the authorities and respect for law and order.
Right. I mean, come on, man. We're healing. You guys wanted this. But yet you're going to treat these guys, what was it, just a talking point? We should end slavery, but we don't have to be nice to them. Lee, he privately chastised fellow ex-Confederates such as Davis and Jubal Early for their frequent angry responses to perceived Northern insults, writing in private to them as he had written to a magazine editor in 1865, and it said, "It should be the object of all to avoid controversy, to allay passion, give full scope to reason and to every kindly feeling. By doing this and encouraging our citizens to engage in the duties of life with all their heart and mind, with a determination not to be turned aside by thoughts of the past and fears of the future, our country will not only be restored in material prosperity, but will be advanced in science and virtue and in religion."
And Jubal Early and Davis are writing to each other. Can you believe this motherfucker, man?
That's not what he said a couple months ago.
Jeez. Fuck him.
Right.
Well,
Oh, poor guy.
let's take a gander down the road to his illness, death, and funeral. September 28th, 1870, he suffered a stroke. 2 weeks later, shortly after 9 a.m., October 12th, 1870, Lee died in Lexington, Virginia from pneumonia. According to one account, Lee's last words the day of his death were, "Tell Hill he must come up. Strike the tent." But this is not fully confirmed. One, because there are conflicting accounts, and two, because Lee's stroke had resulted in aphasia, which possibly rendered him unable to speak. What is it with the Army guys doing out last calls to the men while they're dying? At first, no suitable coffin for the body could be located. The muddy roads were too flooded for anyone to get in or out of the town of Lexington. An undertaker had ordered 3 from Richmond that had reached Lexington, but due to unprecedented flooding from long continued heavy rains, the caskets were washed down the Maury River.
Oh, my.
Oh, Lord.
Jeez, Lee. 2 neighborhood boys, C.G. Chittum, Robert E. Hillis. They found one of the coffins that had been swept ashore, undamaged. It was used for the body, though it was a bit short for him. As a result, Lee was buried without shoes. The honor guard of Virginia Military Institute guarded Lee's body overnight in University Chapel, Washington Lee University. His funeral took place the morning of Saturday, October 15th, 1870. Attendees of the procession included officers and soldiers of the old rebel army, cadets, faculty and visitors of the Virginia Military Institute, students and faculty of Lee University, and Virginia state dignitaries. The Episcopal Church funeral service was led by Reverend William Pendleton. Pallbearers were Judge Francis Anderson, David E. Moore, and former governor of Virginia, John Lecter, and Commodore Matthew Maury. Oh, Robert E. Lee, he was buried underneath the college chapel, where his body remains today.
Dude, that's crazy. Not one of his ex-generals or anybody came to be his pallbearer. Ulysses S. Grant had all of his guys. And
Why weren't his kids his pallbearer?
Right. Or even that. Right. Well, let's take a look at his legacy. Among the supporters of the Confederacy, Lee came to be even more revered after his surrender than he had been during the war, and when Stonewall Jackson had been the great Confederate hero. 1874, in his address before the Southern Historical Society in Atlanta, Benjamin Harvey Hill described Lee in this way. He was a foe without hate, a friend without treachery, a soldier without cruelty, a victor without oppression, and a victim without murmuring.
Oh.
He was a public officer without vices, a private citizen without wrong, a neighbor without reproach, a Christian without hypocrisy, and a man without guile. He was a Caesar without his ambition, Frederick without his tyranny, Napoleon without his selfishness, and Washington without his reward.
Wow. So he had the best of all those men.
There's a high praise there.
Damn.
I don't believe any of it.
Wow. By the end of the 19th century, Robert E. Lee's popularity had been spread to the North. Lee's admirers had pointed to his character and devotion to duty, and his occasional tactical successes in battle against a stronger foe. Military historians continue to pay attention to his battlefield tactics and maneuvering, though many think he should have designed better strategic plans for the Confederacy. He should have. He was not given full direction of the Southern War until late into the conflict. So
yeah, well, not much you can do that by then. Historian Eric Foner, he writes that at the end of his life, Lee had become the embodiment of the Southern cause. A generation later, he was a national hero. The 1890s and early 20th century witnessed the consolidation of white supremacy in the post-Reconstruction South and widespread acceptance in the North of Southern racial attitudes.
Wow.
Robert E. Lee has been commemorated on U.S. postage stamps at least 5 times.
Fantastic.
The first one being a commemorative stamp that also honored Old Stonewall.
Oh, wow.
That was issued in 1936. A second regular issue stamp was issued in 55. And he was then commemorated with a 32-cent stamp issued in the American Civil War issue, June 29, 1995.
Damn.
His horse Traveler pictured in the background.
Washington and
Bet
Lee.
you they don't dare to release no stamp. Well, Trump might.
That might not.
Bet you we'll never get a stamp release again.
Washington and Lee University in Lexington was commemorated on its 200th anniversary on the 23rd of November, 1948, with a 3-cent postage stamp they got.
Oh, good for them.
The central design is a view of the university, flanked by portraits of Generals George Washington and Robert E. Lee. Lee was again commemorated on a commemorative stamp in 1970, along with Jefferson Davis and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, depicted on horseback on the 6-cent Stone Mountain Memorial commemorative issue. The stamp was issued on the 19th of September 1970 in conjunction with the dedication of the Stone Mountain Confederate Memorial in Georgia. Happened on the 9th of May 1970. The design of the stamp replicates the memorial, obviously, the largest high-relief sculpture in the world. Oh, wow. It is carved on the side of Stone Mountain, 400 feet above the ground.
Well, Stone Mountain also led to Lee's appearance on the commemorative coin, which was the 1925 Stone Mountain Memorial half dollar.
Fantastic.
During the 20s and 30s, dozens of specially designed half dollars were struck to raise money for various events and causes.
All right.
This issue had a particularly wide distribution, with 1,314,709 minted.
Oh,
Unlike some of the other issues, it remains a very common coin.
okay.
In 1865, after the war, he was paroled and signed an oath of allegiance, asking to have his citizenship of the United States restored.
Well, as we all heard earlier, his application was not processed by the Secretary of State, William Seward. And as a result, Lee did not receive a pardon and his citizenship not restored. 30th of January, 1975, Senate Joint Resolution 23. A joint resolution to restore posthumously full rights of citizenship to General R.E. Lee. It was introduced in the Senate by Senator Harry F. Beard, Jr.
Bird.
This was the result of a 5-year campaign to accomplish this. Proponents portrayed the lack of pardon as a mere clerical error. The resolution, which enacted Public Law 94-67, was passed. And the bill was signed by President Gerald Ford on the 5th of August. World War II General George Patton said he had prayed to a portrait of...
Yeah.
He prayed to a portrait of General Lee, as well as one of Stonewall Jackson as a child, believing them to be portraits of God and Jesus, and associating their features with his perceptions of the two men. Wow.
Okay, General Patton.
Holy shit. Most decorated general in our time. It was a weirdo.
Oh, he's got some monuments, memorials, and commemorations. Lee opposed the construction of public memorials to Confederate rebellion on the grounds that they would prevent the healing of wounds inflicted during the war.
Good for him.
Nevertheless, after his death, he became an icon used by promoters of the Lost Cause mythology, who sought to romanticize the Confederate cause and strengthen white supremacy in the South.
Yeah, every freaking Western movie from 1930 on up.
Later in the 20th century, particularly following the Civil Rights Movement, historians reassessed Lee. His reputation fell based on his failures to support rights for freedmen after the war, and even his strategic choices as a military leader fell under scrutiny.
Right. What they
Well,
started.
no shit.
Right.
Did they not? All they had to do was read rundowns of the battles.
Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial, also known as the Custis Lee Mansion. It's a Greek revival mansion in Arlington, Virginia. That was once Lee's home, obviously. It overlooks the Potomac and the National Mall in Washington. During the Civil War, the grounds of the mansion were selected as a site of the Arlington National Cemetery. They did this in part to ensure that Lee would never again be able to return to his home.
Damn.
The United States designated the mansion as a national memorial to Lee in 1955.
We'll give you that 100 years later.
a mark of widespread respect for him in both the North and the South.
Well, in Richmond, Virginia, a large equestrian statue of Lee by French sculptor Jean-Antonin Mercier was the centerpiece of Monument Avenue, along with 4 other statues of Confederates. The monument to Lee was unveiled May 29, 1890. Over 100,000 people attended this dedication. That has been described as the day white Virginia stopped admiring General Lee and started worshiping him.
Oh, wow.
Okay. 4 other Confederate statues were removed in 2020, and the equestrian statue of Lee was removed September 8, 2021, at the direction of the state government. Sad.
Wow. Lee is also shown mounted on Traveler in Gettysburg National Military Park on top of the Virginia Monument. He is facing roughly in the direction of Pickett's Charge. Lee's portrayal on a mural on Richmond's flood wall on the James River, considered offensive by some, was removed in the late 90s, but currently is back on the flood wall.
Wow.
Baltimore's Wyman Park, a large double equestrian statue of Lee and Jackson, is located directly across from the Baltimore Museum of Art. Designed by Laura Garden Fraser, dedicated in 1948. General Lee is depicted astride his horse, Traveler, next to Stonewall Jackson, who was mounted on Little Sorrel. Architect John Russell Pope created the base, which was dedicated on the anniversary of the eve of the Battle of Chancellorsville. Baltimore area, Maryland, is also home to a large nature park called, you guessed it, Robert E. Lee Memorial Park.
All right, statue of him was one of the 2 statues, which the others, George Washington, represent Virginia in statutory hall in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Well, it was removed from the Capitol on December 21st, 2020, after a state commission voted to replace it with a statue of civil rights activist Barbara Rose Johns. Or they could have just added her next to Lee and be like, hey, guys, this is how far we come.
I mean, come on.
Well, Lee is one of the figures depicted in bas relief, carved in the Stone Mountain thing with Jefferson Davis and old Stonewall.
Nice. Good for him. The birthday of Robert E. Lee is celebrated or commemorated in several states. In Texas, he's celebrated as part of Confederate Heroes Day on the 19th of January, Lee's birthday. In Alabama and Mississippi, his birthday is celebrated on the same day as Martin Luther King Jr. While in Georgia, this occurred on the day after Thanksgiving before 2016, when the state stopped officially recognizing the holiday.
Damn, Alabama and Mississippi said, nope, we don't celebrate Martin Luther King birthday down here. We celebrate Robert E. Lee Day. That's hilarious.
In Virginia, Lee Jackson Day was celebrated on Friday preceding Martin Luther King Jr., which is the 3rd Monday in January, until 2020. Of course, everything happened until 2020, when the Virginia legislature eliminated the holiday altogether, making Election Day a state holiday instead.
1 United States college and 1 junior college are named for Lee. Washington and Lee University, clearly. And Lee College in Baytown, Texas. The University Chapel at Washington and Lee University marks Lee's final resting place. Throughout the South, many primary and secondary schools were also named for him, as well as private schools such as Robert E. Lee Academy in Bishopville, South Carolina.
The Mississippi River steamboat Robert E. Lee was named after Lee after the Civil War. It was the participant in an 1870 St. Louis New Orleans race. St. Louis to a New Orleans race with the Natchez 6, which was featured in a Currier and Ives lithograph. Robert E. Lee won the race.
Awesome.
Oh, he finally won something, huh? The steamboat inspired the 1912 song Waiting for the Robert E. Lee by Lewis F. Muir and L. Wolfe Gilbert. In more modern times, the USS Robert E. Lee, a George Washington class submarine built in 1958. It was named after Robert E. Lee, obviously, if it's called the USS Robert E. Lee. As was the M3 Lee tank, produced in 1941-1942. Damn, we had an M3 Lee taking out Japanese.
The Commonwealth of Virginia issues an optional license plate honoring Lee, making reference to him as the Virginia Gentleman. February 2014, a road at Fort Bliss, previously named for Lee, was renamed to honor Buffalo Soldiers, which are if you've seen any of our Wild West stuff on our other stuff, Buffalo Soldiers are a black unit of the Union Army.
They are.
A little bit before all this 2020 bullshit happened, huh?
Yeah.
Recent biographer Jonathan Horn outlines the unsuccessful efforts in Washington to memorialize Lee in the naming of the Arlington Memorial Bridge after both Grant and Lee. You can call it the Grant Lee Bridge. Why would you not?
Man,
why are you going to erase history?
Jeez.
Number one, and not even acknowledge history. It was
Right.
probably the 2 biggest foes in literally American history, whether it's scripted in a movie or in real life. There's no two bigger foes than Grant Lee in literally United States history.
Bullshit.
Not even Apollo Creed and Rocky is bigger.
Right. It's pretty close, though. February 2017, the City Council of Charlottesville, Virginia, they voted to remove a sculpture of Lee,
Yeah.
who has no historical link to the city at all.
There's both people. There's good people on both sides.
Right. And they took a Stonewall Jackson sculpture out as well. This was temporarily stayed by court action, though the city did rename Lee Park, first to Emancipation Park, then later to Market Street Park. The prospect of the statues being removed and the parks being renamed brought many out-of-towners, described as white supremacists and alt-right guys, to Charlottesville in the Unite the Right rally of August of 2017, in which 3 people died. As of July 2021, the statue has been permanently removed. The statue melted.
Melted?
In October of 2023.
Well, several other statues and monuments to Lee were removed in the aftermath of the incident, including a 60-foot tall monument in the center of Lee Circle in New Orleans.
I mean, I guess.
Installed in 1884, it featured a 16.5-foot bronze statue of Lee on a marble column. Former Confederate soldier George Washington Cable described it in a tribute. His arms are folded on that breast that never knew fear, and his calm, dauntless gaze meets the morning sun as it rises. That statue removed, pre-2020, May 19, 2017, the last of 4 Confederate monuments in New Orleans to be taken down.
Well, there was a stained glass window in the Washington National Cathedral showing Lee on horseback at Chancellorsville, as well as one in honor of Stonewall. Sponsored by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, they were installed in 1953 and removed once again in 2017 of September. The cathedral plans to keep the windows and eventually display them in historical context. Yeah, right. Them smashed and
Right. Bust of Lee in the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, the first Hall of Fame in the United States, completed in 1900. Oh, wow. In the what is now Bronx Community College. Awesome. A bronze statue of Lee, which had been on display at the University of Texas at Austin, and another with his horse traveler in Robert E. Lee Park in Dallas is also...
let's take a look at some biographies that were wrote about Robert. Douglas Southall Freeman's Pulitzer Prize winning
Pulitzer.
4-volume R.E. Lee, a biography, 1936, which was for a long period considered the definitive work on Lee, downplayed his involvement in slavery, emphasized Lee as a virtuous person. Eric Foner describes Freeman's volume as a hagiography, notes that on the whole,
the biography of a saint, they're saying. Right. Well, what the hell is up with these guys, like, worshiping Robert E. Lee, dude? That's weird.
Wow. He also notes that on the whole, Freeman displayed little interest in Lee's relationship to slavery. The index to his 4 volumes contained 22 entries for devotion to duty, 19 for kindness, 53 for Lee's celebrated horse, Traveler. Man, I love that horse. But slavery, slave emancipation, and slave insurrection all received 5 together.
Freeman observed, without offering details, that slavery in Virginia represented the system at its best. Okay. He ignored the post-war testimony of Lee's former slave, Wesley Norris, about the lie that he made up about Lee flogging the dolphin. Right. More recent biographies offer a broader variety of perspectives, which, of course. Right. Thomas Connolly's The Marble Man, Robert E. Lee and His Image in American Society in 1977, was an iconoclastic revision of Lee's mythical status in the South.
Right.
Robert E. Lee, a biography in 1995 by Emery Thomas. That one attempted a post-revisionist compromise between the traditional and more recent views.
Right. He was going to put in the bad stuff.
Right. Robert E. Lee, A Life, 2021.
And this has all the bad stuff.
By Alan Guelzo, focuses on a study of his character.
Oh, maybe not.
Maybe there's... He might have did this, but this is, maybe, I don't know. I haven't read it. Don't plan to either.
Take a look in popular culture. Lee is a main character in the Shara family novels, The Killer Angels, 1974. Gods and Generals in 1996, which also is a movie. It's fantastic. And The Last Full Measure in 2000, as well as the film adaptations of Gettysburg in 1993 and Gods and Generals in 2003. Both over 3.5 hours long, so get a 12-pack and...
If anybody's listening to this, they know exactly what those movies are.
All right, get a 12-pack and 8-ball, and you should be good to go. Robert E. Lee is played by Martin Sheen in Gettysburg, and he is Robert Duvall in Gods and Generals.
Also, you skipped over the part that it says by Lee's descendant, Robert Duvall, in the latter. So apparently somewhere down the line, Robert Duvall is related to Lee.
Yeah, I knew that. Lee is portrayed as a hero in historical children's novel Lee and Grant at Appomattox.
Oh, okay.
That was in 1950 by McKinley Cantor. His part in the Civil War is told from the perspective of his horse in Richard Adams' book Traveler, 1988.
That might be interesting.
Yeah.
See, Lee was so racist that he had to have a white horse, too, by the way. Mm-hmm. Lee is an obvious subject for American Civil War alternate histories. Ward Moore's Bring the Jubilee in 1953. McKinley Cantor's If the South Had Won the Civil War in 1960. Fair to say McKinley Cantor's a racist as well.
Yeah.
And Harry Turtledove's The Guns of the South in 1992. They all have Lee ended up as president of a victorious Confederacy and freeing the slaves or laying the groundwork for the slaves to be freed in a later decade.
Look at that.
Although Moore and Cantor's novels relegate him to a set of passing references, Lee is more of a main character in Turtledove's Guns.
Yeah. He is also the prime character of Turtledove's Lee at the Alamo. Turtledove's War Between the Provinces series is an allegory of the Civil War told in the language of fairy tales, with Lee appearing as a knight named Duke Edward of Arlington.
Oh, get out of here.
Lee is also a knight in The Charge of Lee's Brigade, an Alternate Generals Volume 1, written by Turtledove's friend S.M. Sterling, and featuring Lee, whose Virginia is still a loyal British colony, fighting for the crown against the Russians in Crimea. That'd be kind of weird.
Sounds like a fucking horrible book.
You ain't getting it. And Lee Allred's East of Appomattox in Alternate Generals Volume 3. Lee is the Confederate minister to London, circa 1868, desperately seeking help for our Confederate states, which had turned out poorly suited to independence. Robert Skimmons' Grave Victory.
Skimming a rinky-dinky-dink.
It features Lee as a supporting character, preparing to run for the presidency in 1867.
Well, give it up, guys.
Right, what the fuck?
Jeez. In Connie Willis's 1987 novel Lincoln's Dreams, a research assistant meets a young woman who dreams about the Civil War from Robert E. Lee's point of view.
Oh, wow.
And as we all know, the Dodge Charger in The Dukes of Hazzard was named General Lee. In the 2005 film based on the series, the car is driven past a statue of Lee while the car's occupants salute him.
Oh, fuck yeah.
It's probably deleted from TV broadcasts. And
That's why we haven't seen Owen Wilson.
Well, it was
Right, a long time ago.
Sean William Scott and fucking Johnny Knoxville, but okay.
Oh, it was Owen Wilson. Where did I get Owen Wilson from? I don't know. It was a good movie. They portrayed it right.
It was good. All except for, honestly, Jessica Simpson.
Yeah.
But what we can do?
Yep.
She had big tits and was popular at the time.
Yep.
That's Robert E. Lee, guys. So, love him or hate him. That's it. You seen his views on slavery, and you seen his views on the Confederacy. You seen his views on post-slavery, and still, even after the Confederacy, he still didn't think black people were intelligent enough to vote, and didn't speak out in public on their behalf at all.
But he wanted them to be free sooner or later. Slowly bring them into society, he said.
Or ship them off to Liberia. Literally. Oh, man. Well, there you go. You heard it. Decide for yourself what kind of... I don't know. I'm divided on this guy, to be honest.
Yeah, he's a rough.
Because on one hand, served in the American Army for 30 fucking something years before he went to the Confederacy. But on the other hand, also became a traitor and went to the Confederacy. So, but yep, that's his story. And history's sticking to it as long as some more revisionist history doesn't pop up. But if it does, just come back to this episode. And I mean, I'm sure whatever we've said here was some revisionist history as well. So you never really know in today's day and age. But that's it. We'll be back next week for, I don't know, maybe we'll do another event. Of the war.
Yeah, or place.
Maybe the Marias massacre that we mentioned in Ulysses S. Grant's episode. If we can find a little bit more about it. All right.
Yeah.
Either that or, I don't know, maybe it'll be Sheridan, Stonewall. We got lots of people. So we'll be here next week for more Behind the Battles of the American Civil War. And we'll see you then. We're the Mother Michiganders.
Bang, dang.